Okay, my name is Althea Greenan. I'm the curator of special collections and archives at Goldsmiths, with a special responsibility for the Women's Art Library. It's thanks to the Women's Art Library that I actually ended up with a job at Goldsmiths, so I have to remain grateful for that organization. And it began as an artist-led project, and now it's an institute of higher education. And so I'm very interested in how artist projects and women artists create these resources, these situations, these spaces in which to not only research but to situate their own work. So when I'm asked who do you want to speak to, who do you want to invite along to have a conversation with, Barby came straight to mind because really your beginnings as an artist, but the way you've expanded what might be considered art practice in such a beautifully sort of powerful way to curating. And I'll let you introduce yourself.
Well, I thought we were going to do this one. But I'll just say Barby Asante, I'm based between London and a lot of Amsterdam at the moment. And I work as an artist, though I had to use these other hyphens often as curator and educator or researcher to almost get people to understand the different layers of my practice. So what else to say? So also as a kind of result of that, I'm also researching at CREAM, which is the Centre for Research in Education and Arts and Media at Westminster University. And I suppose I'm going to do that because that is another way of getting another level of knowledge into a space about.
Is that a practice-led?
It's a practice-led PhD, yes. Yeah, it's practice-led PhD. Yeah. And I suppose Naples speaks it kind of bring together. I suppose a lot of what we're going to be talking about is
Yeah, there's nothing like a PhD to make you kind of question how these things relate or what you're building towards as well. Although I guess there are two different kinds of PhDs. One's that's looking retrospectively and sort of being that PhD professional practice. But it doesn't. It sounds like you're embarking.
I thought there was a choice there. There was a choice in being able to do a reflective PhD, but I much feel like it would be kind of counter to the kind of way of working, in a sense, and kind of generative process of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
How I'm working with ideas. So I think that actually I probably would have come to the same place, but I think it was really nice to kind of continue to kind of make work. And within that, also the reflective process is always happening. Like what I'm saying is I'm honing my ideas about what I've done for the last 3 years.
Is it 23 years?
Yeah, I can time it by I can date the beginning of my practice, my first public exhibitions as well, by the fact that I was pregnant with my daughter when I had when I started. And the first show that I was in was called Angels and Mechanics, and it was about that. And it's really interesting because these things, they disappear, and very difficult to kind of, there was a catalogue made out of this exhibition. It was, again, it was an initiative by 2 women artists,
that?
This was in the, so it would be, I graduated in 95, so it would have been around, 95, 96, and it toured around to various different organisations in like Southern Park in Bracknell, and it went up to somewhere in, like in the Midlands, and maybe even Preston, maybe even. But it was an exhibition and also an incredible program which was talking about, I suppose also thinking about that moment of more discussion around technology and birth, and as well as exploring loss and so it wasn't just also women, but it was an initiative that came from women, gave the opportunity to also have a program around it which talks about different kinds of birth intervention, mothering, those kinds of things as well.
And you were a student?
Yeah, well, you see, when I images of them, I think there are some images you can see in the slide. There is actually, I think we just let them roll, but I think you might have seen actually there's 3 images that were from that work at that time. So I made it, and also I revisited that work. I've been revisiting that work recently. I made an installation that was called Between a Mother and a Child, and at the time it was really. So before that, I kind of really tried to think about, as most students do, as most students of colour or queer students or women do when they go into this kind of art school space where there is just, really just governments of virtuosity in, and they're all really virtuosity, doing this kind of, incredible painting or this big art sculptures or whatever it is there is a desire to kind of explore how you're positioned within that. And I say position rather than identity, because I think that people love to kind of say it's identity. But yesterday when I was with my students at the Royal College, and we were going through like all first year MA students, they're 6 weeks into, we're all in a moment of crisis. And actually the classes, it's not even Christmas, but the first assessments are coming out, they don't know really what they're doing, and kind of like, and all of it was more of, it was less identity, more acceptance, like existential crisis, like I don't know why I'm doing this, I don't know what I'm doing, and all of this. So and you pay a lot of money, and you ask yourself questions, it's like, where is my position in this? And I just became very interested in thinking about imaging practices and where people like myself would be imaged. Thinking about museums or what is this? The artifact. It's ethnographic images. It's kind of a whole. So I started to really sort of look at these. I started to explore and make work with. I found. It's a number of books which are called Peoples of the World. They're like I suppose like the Victorian,
Family of Man phase?
kind of like the Family of Man, I think slightly before. And they're very much in the categorizations and the dusky woman and this. They're just very much kind of categorizing, describing, say for example, the Bantus as describing the trade of a Bantu African or a particular kind of Pacific Islander. These things started becoming quite interesting to me, and it's actually quite interesting to me. So I was thinking about them within the present and how these kinds of images, because there is this view of it being studied, but also there is these things where these images were sold in
just curiosity.
Everywhere, just like the lynching photos were sold like that. And all these were just kind of things that people kept in their houses and also passed amongst each other and sent to as kind of like exotic image. And I was really thinking about how does that also, how is it also in the present that we actually also experience these same ideas about what my body is and how my body travels through time and space and is kind of pathologized.
Would that be a first kind of encounter with a kind of archive that you sort of...
You don't think about it at that time. I think this is what we've talked about, that we're going to talk about. But yeah, I think so. But then, and if I reflect on it as well, because I then was, because I did a number of works that were kind of performative, me kind of taking on the role in the present of some of these characters, and I still use some of those images in my work. So when it came to being in the third year and being pregnant, it was an opportunity to think about how you are pathologized in a particular way.
You're being pathologized anyway because you're pregnant.
Because you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And I also was, just as you do in art college, became very obsessed with Mary Kelly's postpartum document. But actually, she's post the baby. This was pre, so I did things like I photographed myself every week, much to distress of my fellow students because I booked the kind of TV studio every Friday. So they're like, why is she in the studio? Every Friday. And I kind of did a lot of research around the kind of birthing process. I myself had a blood condition, so I was often poked and prodded, and so I was just really thinking about how that connected to the same, the women's bodies, to the same kind of processes and this ethnographic kind of categorizations. So going to the operating theatre museum and seeing all the instruments that they had there that were there for intervening in stubborn babies that won't come out. And so the work, again, this is all these various different formats of being 23 years in. I only have slides of this work. The work was in the end a kind of museum, which was called Between Mother and the Child. And so I had all my instruments of birth were kitchen, basically the plunger. was a fonteuse and tongs, and it was like a birth kit. But the birth kit was all these kitchen utensils that were all placed beautifully in this cabinet, which you can see this. You can see something very similar in the Welcome collection. They have one full of forceps. So that's what it was, and unintentionally, because I just went to Brixton to buy all my ready-mades. It was red, white, and blue. So it was like completely unintentional. So you do have these kind of things where you're like, oh wow, that was pretty something, and that's when coming out of college and actually then going and having a touring exhibition, then that doesn't really go away. That's kind of, I think, I'm ready to continue.
Was it important to be in a group show at that point? Was there some, or to be carried with a theme like ages and mechanics?
I think what it was that I just applied. It was just fortuitous that actually that's what I was doing. So then there was, I think it was like artist newsletter, these kind of things, and it said, exhibition on birth, and I just did that kind of thing. I just sent my work, slides, and just a proposal, and they were like, this is really great. It was literally, I have a photo of the opening when it was at, what was the place in Hammersmith? Riverside Studios.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And
what would they be?
Yeah, she was a baby. She's got her arms up there. She's about 8 months. Kind of, so that's how I know that it's 23 years. Because she's 23 now.
Earlier we were talking about the Brixton Studio project, because what I really wanted to kind of find out is how you made a transition, and I've said this before, if it was a transition from, and you've already answered it in a way with this interesting encounter with those books and that whole concept of categorizing human beings and in a kind of archive taxonomical way. But the transition from practice, coming out of art education into sort of encountering or working or reworking institutions and the ideas of art.
Yeah, it's very odd because it's funny to you say that because I think that is so. I think so that just really nicely follows on to think how I got into arts education and the necessity of being a single mum was to figure out how do I sustain this work, and I worked first for a community arts organisation. A friend of mine was working for them, which was called Emergency Exit Arts, and then I worked for Vietnamese mental health project, just doing like art classes, and also while I was at college, I'd already done some work with communities before, so I'd already had this thing, and then then from that came sort of working with photographer's gallery projects, and then very glad to become a freelance and being able to kind of operate that. And that was very useful with being a single mother and having a small child. They fit very nicely together. That most of my projects were finished. I was working in a school in Brixton, and it would be finished by 4:15. No, 3:15. Because she was at nursery at the time, and picked her up at 5, so this timing was good. And so I think we talked about the Brixton studio. I think she was older. I was starting to do different work. I was starting to do more admin work and curatorial work. And there was a particular project at the Photographer's Gallery which was called the Brixton Studio, and it was like an exhibition that had kind of collected in a very strange way out of skip and then in relation to the photographer the photographs that were left in the studio and also the negatives of a photographer called Harry Jacobs. The Harry Jacobs studio was based in Landell Road, which is just in the more Stockwell area of Brixton. And from I think it's pretty much around 1962, right into the kind of early 90s, maybe 91, 92, photographed basically the Caribbean community as a kind of studio photographer and a wedding photographer and whatever he was needed for christenings or whatever. And so this stuff was kind of roasted by the first stage of gentrification in Brixton, where people just like took his stuff, and there's all these kind of crazy, quirky artifacts everywhere, and then this guy pays Harry, I think, 200 quid for the...
Oh, he was still alive?
Yeah, he was still alive. And the photographer, and then they went to the photographer's gallery to bring this exhibition to fruition. And it was quite late on in that exhibition, there was this realisation that this material was not just merely artifact. So this goes back to me saying that where we positioned, it was not merely artifact, because when you have a photograph taken by a studio photographer, the copyright is with the commissioner, the person, so whoever's been to the studio and had this photograph taken, not the photographer. And so this put them in a problem, which is basically they couldn't show any of his photographs unless they had permission from. And also, it was a living archive because these people, I mean, he was working until the 90s, so many of these people were still alive. And
I love the way you say living archive for, photographs, and because of the subject, because they can only be activated almost by the subject.
They could only be activated by the subject because the subject had commissioned these photographs. And although I think the Photographers Gallery had previously worked with a studio, because I remember being there, which was from Beirut. And so I think that then as an artifact, and Tate actually owned many of these particular photographs from this studio, you couldn't really trace people because they are displaced because of the problem, the war maybe in Lebanon at that time, because most of these photos were from the 40s and 50s. So I think they initially thought they could just treat them in the same way, but actually this is the same city that they are, Brixton is literally down the road, it's a bus ride from where they were. And then they suddenly were like, oh wow, we need to get permission from these people. And for quite late on in the day, I was brought into this curatorial team to find these people, and they had no strategy to how to find these people. Brixton's by our plans, we certain things that were happening. We knew there would be a country show, Lambeth Country Show, for example. We can go there, there are new places to go, new places. And I know we knew what newspapers to get in. And we did start to find people. What was really interesting was all that they wanted me to do was to go up there and get a form signed so that they can have the images. But while I'm going to South Croydon or whatever to meet these people, and they say, yeah, but I don't have the photographs anymore, and they tell me stories of births and deaths and marriages and deportation sometimes or whatever. I'm realising this is a massive thing that we have not kind of taken care of. It's not just material, it's a social history. It's so much more than this. And I think at that point, that was where I suppose maybe I kind of came from post-Napoleon, because I'm holding these stories and working with these people. And I was like, how do you work with this? How do you rectify this? How do the institutions start to actually contend with the kind of histories and the ways in which they treat others, because it's no different. When you think about it, it's just material. And actually, it's actually lives. And all this material is also, all the stuff that's in museums also as well, which is connected to lives, to the rituals, to births, deaths, weddings, all of this life. And then I think from there, that really made me start to think about how do I work with our memories, our presence? How do I start to kind of make work that collects these traces and fragments, but also brings them alive and in dialogue with the places that...
How to make art responsible as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, were they empathetic? Was the Photographers Gallery kind of empathetic to this? Or did they say, don't worry so much, just get the form signed?
Yeah, no. They did start to realise that there was a situation, that there was sometimes, at the time I think this was probably a good idea, so they did a community opening. So they had their normal opening and then a community opening, and I thought that was really great. And then if I reflect on that, as I've developed projects over time, I wouldn't do a community opening, I just do an opening. And everybody's just invited to this opening, because there's also, it perpetuates this sense of the object, subject, them and us, kind of, and also this idea that reinforces ideas of exclusion and inclusion as well. So I wouldn't do that now, but they did do things like that. And then there was, obviously that made the press more interested in the exhibition as well, because then suddenly people got to tell their stories on the radio or, the newspapers. There was a big Guardian article and things like that. And then for some time we did work with a really rather famous artist for a while to think about how we might really think about where this goes, because
It's a collection.
the collection,
Okay.
because it was like, well, it really should be kind of in private hands. It brings up those whole things about how certain collections are private collections, and then such interpreted in particular ways. Where we were kind of thinking, well, we could work with, this should perhaps be in London's collection, or
Black cultural art galleries?
Black cultural art wasn't established then, but has got a number of photos from heritage, and they weren't really established then. And so so we started to have this dialogue, but when you have no resources, even though this person was kind of like, you couldn't have those conversations because people, he was willing, he put some money into something, but then that money out, and then what you really see is that actually archives are the domain of the powerful, because you need to have a resource to be able to keep that going. And money, space, archivists, all of that infrastructure, cataloguing, administration, all of those things are the things that are needed in order to keep that going. So I have been contacted a couple of times since about it, but it's just still very, very much floating. A few photographs in the Black Cultural Archives, but basically this guy still has these.
So it sounds like you're still involved. You're not somebody who does these projects and then sort of leaves them behind.
No, that's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard. And so the kind of relationships just do still persist. But I think it's less of a relationship to the. I think what I'm trying to think through really is, or resolve, is how do we kind of think about contested memory, and also that memory. So my PhD work is really thinking about memory practices. So we don't fit into an archival practice in various ways. And I've done many projects as curator and as also artist with different forms of memory, even very conventional archiving projects, such as I think around the Brixton Art Gallery exhibition.
Yes.
That we I worked on an exhibition that archived the Brixton Art Gallery which was a kind of artist-led gallery in Brixton that began, I think it was in 1981. But we only archived, and it was again another organisation that was there, I think, until the early 2000s. We archived from 1981 to 1985. That was all that we could afford, and that was the beginnings. Heritage Lottery funded, very brilliant project.
This is through the 198 gallery.
Yeah. Archive is at Tate, in Tate's archive. And again, that brings up questions because they're not very interested as well. When we do a negotiation in archiving with a huge organisation, they're interested only in particular. Like if you said, well, we'll do till 2000, but actually that wasn't the time when all the really brilliant and all these people were involved. It was this time. So this time is the time you almost sell to them, but this is the time we'll do that archiving. So you're always kind of in
That's really weird to think of the institution cherry picks for time frames in order
the
to.
institution can get to cherry pick what kinds of archives go in there. I mean, I've worked on a couple of others. I mean, well, I've just recently worked with Barby Asante on a project, and you know, she has obviously the APG archives there, the artist placement group. Barbara Stavini was married to a quite famous sculptor called John Latham, who has a house in Peckham which is called Flattime House, which is kind of preserved as an artwork with a book coming out of a window. and when I think just before he passed away, she started to kind of compile the APG archive, but then when he died, there was more interest in the APG sort of archive. And I think what's really brilliant about the archive is what Serene Nathan, he's a really famous sculptor. He started this charismatic, he's got these really brilliant things to say, and he started this, you know, artist placement group, and they went out into industry and all of this stuff. But the archive reveals all the work that was behind it. So that's the letters that Barbara was writing, and it was the kind of annotations that Barbara was doing. It was all of this stuff. So actually, it was very good for Barbara to put that into and then to have this negotiation tape about which she sold the archive. We donated the archive to Tate. Right. So then there's like different kinds of negotiations you can have. And then I think what also becomes interesting there is that she can negotiate that. Because they didn't take then her archive of her project, which is O&I.
I am the archive? Oh no,
O&I is another project that she started after. So now she's having a negotiation with them. But one of the O&I projects is this Southern Education Research project, where they got the slush funds of the kind of Inner London Education Authority to do a project in Southwark that was about education. So they weren't interested in that one
because it's education.
Because it's education. So therefore you get a kind of, you know, a situation where it is a bit like, well, whose stories get told and what stories get told. And I think that's why I've been really working on my practice, is to try and I look at it more as making proposals, propositions, rather than kind of making archives, so to speak. They are propositions or ways in which we might archive.
So you were telling me before about the karaoke, which is such a beautiful idea, in that you're working with people and they were elders.
Yeah, in fact, that moves so nicely on from the Harry Jacobs thing, because where I didn't find the opportunity to be able to tell, you know, it kind of was upsetting to me that people weren't, the photographs were there and their stories weren't there. I was just trying to think about how do you capture stories. So my crazy like artist mind initially, I was just like, well, I'm going to make a karaoke machine, and it's going to be like, you're going to be able to program it, and I want to put tech and all this stuff, and try and make this machine that would just like bring out songs and bring out images and all of this stuff. But then I realised that was just like crazy, and it was going to cost me loads of money. And then I actually really went to karaoke, and I was like, oh, it's just a video, a balancing thing, and like, okay. But it kind of came out of really staying in relationship with people after the Brixton Studio project. Just staying in a relationship and having teas and meeting people and just having kind of discussions with them, and then we having this crazy idea. And then just through that talking about music and what music they brought over with them, and how music was kind of a comforting thing, especially when people were working a lot, and also how music kind of became part of the kind of family life and And through that, we did a lot of reminiscing, collecting music, listening to music together, and then also singing together, drinking lots of cups of tea, me getting bossed around quite a lot, and we devised a kind of project together, which was kind of collecting material, making these karaoke videos, deciding what music we were going to have, which songs we could get copyright to record, and put in the DVD that we were going to make. We also made a short documentary about a few of the people, so then we could extend the story, so from those photographs into actual like film, and made this kind of karaoke DVD where people could actually sing the songs. And when you watch the video, you actually also get the kind of video photographs and archive footage and all kinds of stuff that would be kind of really connected to or be part of the project, or the kind of archive of the project. And then we also did these performances. So we did a performance on Clapham Common, in Bandstand in Clapham Common. It was also really important that we did these kind of public things. Also almost like marking site, because I don't know if people know, but the first, when Windrush came over in 1948, the men and one woman, there was one woman in that, because we had somebody that was on that also as part of the group. So the mythology of Windrush that we have now was several boats, several aeroplanes, and all kinds of things that people came over on, even trains. They had their first bunker that was in Clapham Common. So it was really awesome, like very significant that we actually managed to get to do this performance in Clapham Common as well. So when I'm thinking about the archival, I'm thinking about the sites and the bodies and there's much more than this documents that are kind of other things that we think of as the archive.
Is this in response also to maybe the precariousness of archives in the Caribbean? Like going back to the collection of photographs and how these photographs that Harry Jake, the studio photographs were commissioned in order to send pictures of, here I am in London and I'm doing fine kind of thing. And then, but of course the photographs are sent back to, and then there isn't the affluence or the safe spaces to preserve these, and so they become lost. So is there a sense of how precarious these memories are, because once they leave these geographical sites, they leave?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm going to ask this with the tutorial, we're just kind of reflecting on a tutorial that I had yesterday with a student who is from Kazakhstan, and she described herself as Kazakhstan, but she said, I'm from Kazakhstan, and she introduced herself to me. But I grew up in Russia, she said, and then about 8 years ago, my family moved to the UK. So she described herself as Kazakhstan. She said, but people don't just do this in Kazakhstan, in Russia. This is kind of like a thing. It's not really a thing, but she somehow really wants to understand this thing that she's connected to. So in the summer she went to Kazakhstan and started to kind of look at material and film and try and find the archives. And what she discovered was that the archives were bitty, and also because also there were nomadic people before Russia went in. Basically, Russia sent their kind of like dissidents to Kazakhstan. Because she's also got quite kind of literary family. Her grandfather was an opera singer on the Russian side, so they sent all of these kind of dissident problematic, like, artists, intellectuals, send them all to Kazakhstan. And she also said that, so then post-independence, there isn't anything being archived. So Kazakhstan or Pakistan, it just lives in the past, right? So she was just like, how do you kind of capture that? Because there's a whole load of time that is not even captured, and actually it means that Kazakhstan actually only exists in the past. And I think that I'm kind of interested in this notion of, so in my research, or what I'm trying to kind of think through is this Akan notion. My family's from Ghana, and in the kind of Akan sort of language systems, and have a pictograph of a bird that is looking backwards, taking egg off its back, which is Sankova. Which is basically been interpreted in diaspora culture as go back and get it. And I think in this go back and get it, and the looking back, there's this like capturing of the go back and get the bird, get the egg or get the something, but perhaps not also that actually being able to have a past, or to be able to kind of reflect on the past. I recently found a poem that was written about Sankova, which said, take from ancient times what you need to bring into the future. And I think that's what I'm more interested in, is how it is. But memory only lives in the present, really. It's only because we enact it all the time that we actually remember. But we also do this because we kind of need to. And also gives us ground, and it gives us a sense of presence, and connects us to something, to ancestors, or to stories, to villages, to places, and so. But these are also, I think, the only way that we can really start to imagine futures. Yes. So that's why I think of my work as proposals, rather than propositions, rather than an actual kind of archive.
There's an activity. There's a kind of and giving agency and permissions.
It's sort of an embodiment of how we might be able to sort of think forward.
Shall we listen to a sound piece or something?
Yeah, I have a couple. I think there's a nice way of being able to look at this. I think one work. I've got two works that I think I'll bring out as video. And one of them is based on Horace Obe's 1968 film, Bald with Nigger, which, I think you know which one, BN October. Let's not play it straight away. I just want to tell you a little bit about it. So basically, again, my daughter features so much in my kind of thinking. It's also important to know that she's an artist now. She works at the Archivist, and she's got a fellowship coming up at Lux, mostly in film, and also she's part of a collective that also did this work with me. And so she went to university studying anthropology, and the first week she had, She had Marxism, because it's Sussex University, they don't do classic anthropology. She had a class in Marxism, and she also had a class in with Web de Bois material. So she became really excited, and also joined the film club, and she's like watching Horace Obe's film Pressure, and came back and had a real critique of the way that he framed women within this film. And that was the first ever film. Horace Obe's film Pressure was the first ever feature film that was made by a black director, and was actually banned. It was banned because it showed police violence. And so I just decided to do research around Horace's work, even though I've known his son forever. I didn't really know his film.
So he's a British director?
He's from Trinidad, but he lived in and discovered that he made this film with James Baldwin. And this film was really a very, very special film. discovered in the archives in 1968, just after, if you match it to the I Am Not Your Negro film now, which I discovered later, it was probably, he talks about being in London and receiving the news that Martin Luther King had been killed in a restaurant. His sister came, his sister was his, and so I'm figuring that this was at the same time, around the same time, he was in the UK, and then therefore did this conversation at the Caribbean Students Association, which was in Kensington at the time. And he gave this very rousing speech about America, race, war, just a whole lot of stuff that was just like needed to be changed. He was very angry. It was a very frank conversation. But what was really, I think, really brilliant was it was hitting as an African American, or as a Negro, as he described himself, hitting a new black British population who were just arriving and trying to presence themselves in Britain. Because they had very different questions and things with this tension. And I was very interested in how we would look, how we could use that in the present. And so basically, our process, this act of remembering. I'll show you and then I'll tell you. Let's have a look at how we've been working with it.
I'll tell you the story.
So this is just a trailer from one of the many performances that we've done. So initially it started as a research project with those young people. It was like them 2 young people that were kind of really researching the archives, which included the George Padmore Institute. This is not just the Black Cultural Archives, in fact, that was the time when that was actually being opened, but looking at other archives, looking at the present, and also at that time we also intervened in an institution that was having its funding cut, that was an institution that was supposed to be a black-led art institution, and so at that time we were housed there as well, so we had this opportunity to interrogate not just this film and its time in the present, but what these people were asking as young people who had arrived in the UK and were trying to make a home. You know, the questions around institutions and where they belong and all of this stuff was all wrapped up in the film. And we transcribed the whole film and started to make performances with the script. And what we would do is we would do it through like a process of inviting people to come and what I call researchers study with us as Fred Moten and Stefan and Harlan, and we study this script together and we write it for these performances. So that these performances were all almost like evoking Baldwin's words and the context, but also putting that into our context. So each of this sort of is done in various places, in Birmingham, in London, in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, not Amsterdam, in Paris, in Glasgow. Each of them kind of records, because of the people that we work with, that particular place, context of certain histories within that place. So Birmingham, we could not write a script that also included thinking about the Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, for example, but also bringing that into the present. And when we had a person who was from South Africa, his Cape Colour from South Africa, how he kind of interpreted his position as well in there. So there's a lot of personal and political, also things, because he's talking about war, and we can talk about there's terrorism in Syria, and so each of these scripts records a time and kind of the layers of all these things that are happening in the world, just as his speech did. So yeah, and just to go back on the kind of making work like this and collating it, it's like, this is all stuff that is kind of set on computer hard drives and needs to be collated, and we filmed all of them. Because also, like, this is really to there's two things happen, is that I intervene into this idea of archive and performing archive, but then also make archive, yes, like an artist archive with all this stuff that needs organising at some point.
So like we said before, you need a nice grant to archive your
start
material.
I think that can give up a little bit for a couple of, But also just to think about also, and I like this notion of reenactment as well, but in the present. So that's what I see that as being, is that we're taking the script and the way that we're also setting it up, because we didn't really see it in this clip, but actually he's on a panel with several people, is also setting up a very similar kind of context in terms of how it's delivered and the performance, even though we do the other thing beforehand. And then also he has the sort of normal Q&A and how we deal with the Q&A as well. So we're basically also we plant some questions and then people just ask us random questions as well. And you're kind of part authority, not authority, but also creating a dialogue in which people have to, we're all contending with the situation of our world right now. They're quite moving pieces actually, really very moving and quite powerful. But more recently as well, I have another clip to show. More recently I've been working with kind of family stories and materials. I'm going to do, we're going to do Miss Ghana. So I'm really thinking about my family's arrival to the UK, actually in '66, not actually in 57, but the relationship that they have to 1957 is my mum would be about 16, which is the independence of Ghana. And her mother died 2 years ago, my grandmother died 2 years ago, she was 102. And so I've been really, and as an African, writer, kind of proverbial thing which says when an old man dies, a library is burnt. And so when I kind of started writing, I was like, what of an old woman? What is her stories? What are her stories? And so I started to really think about this notion of independence and what we understand and what we know of it, all the men, all the kind of the moments, the treaties, the this, the that, all of that kind of stuff. But to also think about who were the women that were around. So this is still research that I'm doing, because I've just found about 6 women who were also kind of part of the that somehow worked, whether as administrators or whatever, on the actual independence kind of treaties and campaigning at that time. But also thinking about the very invisible things that would have been needed to keep this hope going. I mean, this is the feeling, this is the kind of, the everyday stuff. And I've been then working to 2 things I'm doing, like collecting material like this that I'm going to show you to kind of just sort of try and think about evidencing it. And the other thing I've been doing is also working with other women of colour from very different places, from very different places in the world, and to do declarations of independence. So to rethink this notion of the idea of independence and self-determination, and particularly at this time, as we're in Britain or also in Europe, because I've been doing this in Europe, where there are more and more nationalist declarations of independence. So Brexit, for example, is a kind of, there's almost a declaration of like Britain's independence. But what does that mean, and how does that kind of manifest in our bodies, and what is it that we, so it's kind of speculative as well as it being kind of performative, but also a way of kind of gathering and being together in really thinking through our journeys as archive, but also our presences as ways to improve the future. So I'm going to show you a couple of clips now first one I'm going to show you is this Miss Ghana comes to. Because this is, so one of the things I started to do was to try and look for material that included or told stories of women around 1957. And I'll show you this quickly also.
Her name is Monica Kamakika, which means kingmaker, a very appropriate name for a beauty queen. Her official title is Miss Ghana, and she's arriving at London Airport for a 12-day visit to Britain. And who better to show Monica the sights of London than Miss Great Britain, Iris Warren. In her own country, Miss Ghana is a seamstress, so naturally she would like to visit one of London's fashion houses. Preferably fashions which she doesn't get a chance to look at in Africa, like this 1,000-pound mink borrower shown by expert Mr. Deanfield. A little warm on the tropics, but it feels good in London. And now for the call and catchphrase, for diamonds sparkle all the world over. And when jewelers display their wares so invitingly, they know what they're doing. Miss Ghana decides she likes London indoors or out, and London is glad to welcome a very charming representative of a brand new country.
You didn't see her last move.
There's a very unemotional tension around that film for me when I discovered this film, when I found the story of Monica, who was resistant to be a beauty queen. But this was one of the things that was put up as a kind of independence celebration. It was to kind of gather people, women from all these villages to be in this beauty contest. And she was also a mother of two. She won, and so she's also, if you look in the kind of official films, you do see her kind of around. When she arrived in London, that was her prize, by the way, was her prize. So very interesting, right? You become an independent country, but yet you send, as it says at the end, the representative of your new country, this woman, to London for her prize. But anyway, she arrived in a chocolate box. I haven't found one of these yet, but her image was on a chocolate box. I'm thinking of that. Anyway, I'll show you what I've been doing. Yes, that's really quite there's a sort of antagonism in this film for me. She's taken to see diamonds and she's extremely seamstress and then furs and this kind of thing. So she was obsessed. I was obsessed with this film. I had a little research exhibition and must have watched it about 500 times. This is only 1.5 minutes, so you couldn't watch it. And decided that I needed to embody her. And then I got invited to be in an exhibition in Baltic in Newcastle, which was kind of an exhibition which was part of the Freedom City project that they had, which was commemorating the 60th year since Martin Luther King was given an honorary degree at 50 years at Newcastle University. And so I was like, she's got to visit the site that we had this. So we visited, she visited Newcastle and we did various, I'll show you when we went to various different sites around Newcastle. And it was really interesting going to the gallery and so but Newcastle doesn't really have a colonial past with a great big grey statue right in the middle of the city, and the cathedral full of flags from the Northumbria Fusiliers battles in Mauritius, all these various different colonies. And so I was really thinking about that kind of tension which is here, that's in this film, and then this, Iris Wallace taking her around, and gestures of, the gestures of relationship between Iris Wallace. And if you notice that when she walks into Asprey's, she's holding her hand,
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah, she's holding it, and there's a way in which she's moving around, which is kind of intimate and aggressive. And I also discovered this poem by an Ghanaian poet, which is called As Well as a Painful Declaration of Independence. And so I've also been working with that. That's been a kind of leader in my discussions with other women and stuff.
Was that written at the time?
No, it was written, she's actually in a book called in 1992. 1992, her book, which was called Ranglietta in January. And because Anna's work is not necessarily archived in these books and these anthologies, I don't know when she's written it, she wrote it, but it's a kind of, she talks about independence, but not only independence, but also agency as a woman, a black woman, and being able to kind of, she doesn't know where she's going to go with her agency, but she's claiming it in this just kind of, and it's in the third clip of, so I actually made 2 films, I'm actually making 10, because Monica's visit was a 10-stop visit in London, but I made to kind of reference that kind of moment. I'm making 10 films, and I've made 2. One is very long and one is shorter, and that is London Sequence. And I made this one, let's not make it, I made this one really also, because I need to think about, let me play it for you and then I'll tell you why I made this one.
We're approaching the Grenfell, I recognize that. I felt like you could have grabbed her hand and taken her to that wall. It was something, it's amazing.
Yeah, it was very, I had to do this one as well because my friend, my colleague, did the same. I was in Grenfell. Also, the man in there is an archive himself.
Yes.
He is Colin Prescott. He was chair for many years of the Commission for Racial Equality and a filmmaker, an artist himself. He was just like, you mean you're not going to let me speak in this film? I was like, I don't have time, it's fine, we'll do that. But he wrote, and one of the things that I really wanted to do is he wrote an incredible article about the community and the need for people's inquiry around and also about the community of North Kensington related to the carnival and how it came together after the death of Kelsey Cochran, who also saw the platform. So Kelsey Cochran was one of the first, let's just say, like racial, really publicised murders of a black man by racists. That also really galvanised the community at that time to develop initiatives around kind of connecting the carnivals and all of that sort of stuff. And so he was kind of in an article drawing the parallels of what was happening around the community, galvanising around Grenfell as well. But also that has a different kind of antagonism because now, of course, it's a gentrified area as well. So I really wanted to kind of think about all the various different tensions as well. People that died in there. There were lots of Muslim bodies, and we say 70 and 72. But we also know that wasn't. People still say that's not so because there's a whole bunch of undocumented people that registered is not dead. And I don't know if anyone's seen recently the inquiry into this heat helicopter images that are just horrendous. And so it just really, I just thought also that this really connects to the histories. These histories that are kind of hidden in our streets. And they're so hidden because all those plaques are not put there by Kensington and Chelsea Council. You notice there's all these other places that certain histories get erased and there's this gentrification happens. And And I thought it was really interesting that also there's a part in it where there's, I think there's a tonkatsu, is a Japanese restaurant. There's an off license which is called Japanese, basically Jamaican.
Japanese rum
shack. And then there's an American laundry. It's also this place where, you know, that it has gathered all these people from all of these different places, but now it's kind of, it's like a circus of this, you know. But then this really horrific thing happens. And so I wanted to also think about how we're all still in this afterlife of colonialism and slavery within our very everyday existence and the violences that happen. So I wanted to make that one there. She's also, just to say, the Queen is also going to be going to Glasgow very soon, actually, and what I've been discussing with Glasgow is actually we could do a whole merchant city thing. This Glasgow's, you know, made in slavery. And I was like, but no, I'm really interested in what collection. I've visited their stores of collections of arts.
What's out of sight?
Yeah, the stuff that's out of sight. And that was really interesting. The store has all the museum items and it's all this. And I thought, it's really exciting. She goes to a different kind of place. Let's go to the store. And Katie, who's the curator, has started bringing. She's like, we've got an abolition teapot. So, and also the Lord Provost says, oh, the Lord Provost is like a mayor. Because it says, oh, she really wants to meet you. And I was like, oh, the Queen can meet me. So you know, so each one becomes this kind of very interesting take on this. What is this visit? But
it becomes a state visit. I mean, retain that aspect of it as well.
But it's a really funny being on the street dressed like this. Amount of people in Newcastle, congratulations, Miss Garner, congratulations. And also in Notting Hill. Though I think right now they got it a bit more, but it was still this really funny performative kind of, you know.
Especially you're accompanied by this looking.
Yeah, and also she's really good. And also I wanted to play with her. She's actually Mauritian. She's also got this, so you know, this kind of sort of strange identity that's not really there, but there as well. But she's really good in doing things like in the Newcastle one, you see a lot of her pushing me forward. Like her hand, so she's really taking on her own. So this kind of very tense. And I also wanted to use the Amataji poem because this is the material I'm working with, this tension of really trying to find a space where you belong in your agency as well. And this poem speaks about that severing. I'm not coming to this meeting if you didn't care, basically. So I think it really resonates with that moment of just seeing that. I mean, for me, I know hearing the home messages and Khadija trying to get out of the fire at that time, and you know, just into the inquiry, people saying, "Don't come out." She's in the 20th floor. When I saw those heat visions, I was just like, she was never getting out. It was not even a thing.
She was with her mother.
She was with her mother. Yeah. So, but I just like thank you.
Is it? Oh my goodness, sorry, I don't have any, I've lost track of time. We should really, does anybody have any questions? I know sometimes it's really hard to have a question or keep a question in a discussion like this, but...
or even comments.
Yeah.
Just a comment about the film you just saw. I mean, I thought the fact that you didn't really have time to finish reading the plaque and that you couldn't quite hear the poem. In a sense, it was, I mean, I'm sure it was deliberate on your part, and it kind of made you want to go and actually go there and see what the rest of the plaque said. And, you know, it had the effect of teasing you in a way, that you're telling these stories, but we don't have enough information in the film to actually fully see what they are.
Yeah, I think
Or to just consume it. You're not delivering it in an easy way.
It's funny because I had that conversation with student yesterday, it's like, how do you not just deliver it in a kind of, you think about, where I was thinking about the ethnographic image is supposed to deliver all this kind of information. How do you not just deliver it where there's to be a bit of thought or kind of, really think about the relational aspect of it. And I'm sort of ambivalent. That was my editor that did the timings, and then I was just like, do we want it longer, do we not? Should we do an edit? Do we not do an edit? I think there's also that but people do visit there, they do visit that area. People go and see it. They go to see Grenfell Tower, even though it's covered. So perhaps there is, and I never really noticed it, but perhaps there is something really good about not being able to see it all, so that you don't just go and go, okay, I just want to go see this place, but actually there's much more of a history of presence and death in that area, which is not just about a carnival and a tower, but are kind of these symbols of that, and they're very contrasting symbols. One of like joy and presence in the street, even though there's an antagonism towards it and a desire to get it off the street, it's still there, and it's still there because it brings millions to London at that time. And then there's also the antagonism because they really don't know what to do with Grenfell. Just don't know. Yeah, and it's a very different site to like say the Twin Towers. There's a memorial. They don't know what to do with that. It's like put a memorial garden, but this is prime land. We can build on this. New places for people who will spend £1 million on an apartment. It's difficult. And also while the inquiry's going on, too much. So, and also I really feel it's like the markers of presence, particularly of, for want of a better word, migrant communities, are, they're not monuments. There's nothing monumental about that.
I'm just wondering, building your projects usually to be kind of ongoing. I just wanted to anything you're working on at the moment.
About the needs. Well, I am working on this. I'd say that this is all part of what I call an episodic kind of declaration of independence for Amma, for Abba, for Charlotte, and out of what, and it's these excavations of finding that material, and also using it in different ways, like reenacting things or thinking of different ways to kind of articulate different kinds of stories. I'm also very interested in how these stories become ways. So I work a lot with groups of women in these performances that are called declaration. I actually have a video of one we can put on and I can show you. So I'm currently working, it's cut one, two cut. And I'm actually working on this and building on it to make it like a big performance that's going to happen in February in a actual kind of sort of summit type space, which is going to be an exhibition, an installation in the summit and a film, sort of maybe some speculative film. So it's like, people write books. I was just thinking about writing. My practice, I feel very much akin to writing. And so I was reading my friend's book that she self-published, and I thought, I love the way she's written it, because she's written it all over the place. Because actually, I think a lot of people who write things in, they write a bit of a chapter here, it's never linear. And actually, this is what I'm looking at this work as being. It's almost like I'm writing a book that is called, as always, a painful declaration of independence for Amma, for Abba, for Charlotte Nashville, in these art pieces. And so they're not linear. Maybe perhaps my summit is my conclusion, but it's not actually, it doesn't live in the same way. So this is my kind of ongoing project, is to think about how you think about women's presences in history.
What will it be?
It will be in Baltic. They love me.
Oh, great.
You can have a solo show. Oh, that's a very good idea. So it'll be Baltic. It opens at the end of February. I'm currently working on the designs, which is quite exciting, for a spec. It's like it's a summit space, but the whole logos, the whole everything, it's all about, it's...
Is it in the nature of like the Gosh Kamsuga thing?
It's so funny, my producer also works for
Oh, right.
It's so funny. Maybe not.
Okay.
Yeah, but I remember the space that they did as well.
Yeah, which was a recreation.
Which was a recreation. I think we're more speculative about it. It's so, if you see images of the UN, there's usually this kind of round space. There's a kind of flag and it's the whole kind of thing. You can also see this in Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever. What's the one? The Star Wars, when they had the woman with the, not Princess Leia, but the other,
Princess Amidala.
yeah. There's a kind of scene as well, which is probably a bit more futuristic in a way, because I'm also thinking about futures, and that this is also thinking about how you kind of I do a lot of like ritual and healing work as well now, and so it's thinking about how you create futures, and a question from my really good friend Karen Salt, who's the director from the Centre for Race and Rights in Nottingham, and she asks this question often in forums, which is like, how do you become critical? How do you do your work, or how are you critical in doing your work and remain whole in unjust spaces? And so I'm imagining that wholeness really within this summit, and this summit is actually about how we're creating the future rather than a kind of future, but it's set in this sort of future, and it's been happening through these performative moments with different women doing these declarations, and we should show you a video.
Fantastic.
So I was listening to something the other day. It's kind of like archive and the vulnerability and the celebration, all kind of in because there's a lot of the stories are also remembering, recalling. So the speech that she does recalls the Ardipesphere kind of what do you call it, poem, you can call it, that is attributed to Nelson Mandela. It's not Nelson Mandela, there's a woman called Marion Williamson, but to reappropriate that and to kind of really bring herself into that into that poem and rewrite. So doing a lot of rewriting and writing, and also sometimes in the performances, because we've got a resource, and this resource is often the way that women of colour stories are articulated in anthologies, like Gloria Anzaldua's This Bitch Called My Back, or The Daughters of Africa, which is I can see her beautiful face right now, but I can't remember. Oh yes, why can't I just remember that? It's just going to think I'm sorry, I can see your face. Or Revolutionary Mothering, which is Alexis Paul Guns, which is recently, again, because we talked about these resources, and also thinking about, back to the women's art library as well, what are the resources that people have to give, and there's a lot of donation and ways. So recording is a very different way of, you have to record in a very different way of doing it. So also the performances become, like the reason why I use this idea of ritual, because ritual is a container of memory, and rituals are used, I often thought with my family, when people started to die, people needed to recall the rituals of death. And, to be able to contain the pain, grief, and also the joy of that person's life. And they found it really difficult to remember, because obviously come in the 60s, you don't start dying until they're in the 90s, and then they're like, what are we doing? We don't know how to do this. And they had to learn how to do it, and do it again. And so that's why I also talk about this idea of a circle, and circles being able to hold things in particular ways, which is to do with ritual. And I think that at the end of the day, to go back to archives, I think that it's also has this kind of ritualistic thing, but maybe in a much harder way than these kind of moments of togetherness. So I'm really interested in that togetherness and remembering together.
And I like the crossover too. I mean, there was, now I'm going to go away with a million different ideas.
But that's okay, that's fine.
I do have this ritual at the end of the day of putting the things back into the archive, and and there's always this idea, within a library or an institution, oh, you don't have to do that, leave that to the assistants or something. But it is about, here I am rebuilding the space that had accommodated a lot of different kind of ruptures, interventions, i.e. research, and remembering, i.e. putting back together in different ways as well. So,
But also, let's forget, those things are all connected, archivist, curator, that curate comes from care. And that kind of notion of care, and I think part of it is also bringing care back into the memory, like working with these things, thinking about also how you bring, because we can't just take care of one hegemonic idea, because there's loads of different people. There's a nice thing, analogy one of before this said to me yesterday, 2 days ago, she said often, she's a psychotherapist, often people, when we think about this idea of inclusion, there's this centre, and everyone wants you to kind of almost get into that centre, instead of the centre looking at, actually there's all these different possibilities, all these different ideas, all these different ways of being. And it's actually to contend with that, rather than to try and force it all into this particular way of being, which I think is a lot of institutional difficulty right now. Is this just trying to form everything in one way? And even while we're having all this very explicit diversity, it still wants to it's still but it's got to be in here, in this way.
Whereas we could be expanding, and that's another way of looking at the future.
I mean, I think I've worked with so many different, people who work, made punk archives and squatter archives and just different kinds of feminist archives, mothers, all these kinds of things. Because also these voices need to be they need to find a space for the ground in order to.
I think in one of your one of the things that you've written, that you had this phrase, the unaccredited knowledge, which I thought was a great way of sort of expressing that as well. It's still knowledge.
It's knowledge,
Were there any other questions?
Is the location you choose, the library, any particular reason? Or?
Oh, the library that was,
Yes, where was
that was in the Lightbox Development Agency's building, and they supported the project through a commission that was called the Library of Performing Rights. So I'm also creating a publication for that library. So that's why that performance was in that library, was there.
I think it was a perfect fittings with your library is also set of knowledge inside the box.
Absolutely.
And you're creating new knowledge and new environment, new form of knowledge.
Exactly.
Creating, which I think is...
I think it's a really great venue. I think we looked really, I thought it looked really quite nice. When the first you're like, well, this is a really mad venue, but actually, why not? It's a knowledge, it's repository of knowledge, as you say, and the ritual was a repository of knowledge.
I mean, your previous film also was the one you went to near to the Dolphin Tower.
Yeah.
And suddenly film stopped.
Yeah.
And it's also fitting with the life that we lost.
Yes. Yeah.
The tower and the writings.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like untold, a story
Yeah.
to be told.
Yeah.
And we do not know how.
No, and that's the end of the poem as well. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how to create my story, but I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to go. I'm just going to do that. And I think that is probably why I also think about things, a kind of proposition for, a way to do this.
We have a lot to thank you for. Anyway, because you're
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.